gorgeous, though slightly chilly morning, and we are here to talk about the next generation or evolution of cloud computing, which is predicted to be around IT automation. So our agenda this morning, my name is Paul Hearns. I'm editor of TechPro magazine and chair of the TechFire series of events. And I'll be doing a little bit of setting the scene, a little bit of context, a bit of market information, that sort of thing, to give you a bit of a picture of what we will be talking about this morning. But the adoption of cloud computing is accelerating, and it seems to be going in a very specific direction, and that is hybrid. So hybrid cloud infrastructure, where people take different elements of the services that they need from both internal and external resources. So Gartner predicted that half of all enterprises will be using it by 2017. That's not very far away. So even though we've had the extra month of summer, which we don't normally get, it is actually nearly the end of the year. 2017, not far off. IDC agrees, where they did a survey last year and found that half of enterprises are going one direction in terms of private cloud, but the other half are indicating that they will be rolling out a hybrid cloud approach. So it's predicted that this is a natural evolution of cloud computing. So it's not as if it's some great leap on which people are taking a massive risk. In one sense, there is a risk in terms of implementing these things and not being able to control them. But increasing numbers are seeing it as a strategic evolution of what they are doing. It's really sort of a logical next step. But again, despite this momentum and this interest, there are certain things to be aware of, and it's really the old habits of IT. And this is a quote from an American analyst who said that unfortunately, managing infrastructure always seems to be a bit of an afterthought when it comes to IT. While that might be a valid criticism, there is hope certainly in this area. But what is certain is that new technologies are going to be required to manage this new environment. New technologies that don't necessarily exist right now, but certainly are developing and are based on a very specific path and evolution. And open standards are really a key element of that. So again, the IDC view is that new things are going to be needed for this. So the good news on this front is that the market value is such that it will not escape the attention of all of the big vendors. They will pour money into this, they will pour effort into this, and it will produce results. So essentially, the market opportunity is really in favor of the end users at this point.
We're just getting more and more machines in the data center. Actually, curiously, we're not getting more and more physical machines in the data center. If you look at the data from folks like IDC, who collect this worldwide, they'll tell you that the number of machines out there, the number of servers, physical servers out there in the world, has stayed more or less static since 2008. It used to grow quite fast. It used to grow 5 or 10% a year for a long time. But then in about 2008, when the financial crisis hit globally, it flattened and in fact dipped a little bit. It's been growing, maybe a couple of percent a year for the last 2 or 3 years. But essentially, the global physical server population is flat or thereabouts. So you're going, oh, that's great, no more servers. Well, no, it's not that there are no more physical servers. It's just that we've moved the growth curve to the virtual. So what's happening now is, yup, sure, the number of physical servers has stayed flat, but the number of virtual servers, the number of virtual machines that your folks are being asked to handle continues to grow. And if you kind of draw a line through the old physical server growth curve, well, it just carries on now with a virtual server growth curve. And so you now look at server consolidation, you now look at how can I get those old physical machines out and turn them into virtual machines. And so one of the ways in which we offer more for less is we try and do that by virtualization. And if you think about the whole movement towards cloud, actually virtualization is clearly an absolutely key part of that. It is part of the answer. But in order to do virtualization effectively, you have to do a couple of things. The first thing you have to do is you have to start to automate. You have to start to deliver this stuff in a mechanical way. because I like your quote at the front of it from Niels Bohr saying prediction is hard, especially about the future. I think Niels Bohr was Danish, so he's allowed to use Danish quotes, old Danish proverbs, and have them attributed to it. But what you also see from great physicists, perhaps the greatest physicist of all time was Isaac Newton. He said, "If I have seen further, it is only because I've stood on the shoulders of giants," he said. And what he meant by that was I've leveraged all the stuff that's happened before me in order to build this new edifice that I have created, in his case, the theory of gravity and calculus and little things like that. So he created these great things, but he said, I depended on all that stuff that's been done before. And he depended on it in the formulation of mathematics. And what mathematics is about is mathematics is kind of an automation for the mind. Mathematics is about saying, we can take all that stuff that used to be really, really hard, and we can produce a formula for doing that. And that's how we make progress. That's how we make progress in the world of mathematics. That's how we make progress in the world of physics. Is we do that effectively by automation, by mental automation. By taking processes that used to be complicated and reducing them to simple formulas that we can just trot out. So something that would have taken, that took Newton decades to calculate, something about the orbit of the Earth around the Sun, we now reduce to a simple formula. It's an ellipse, roughly speaking. And you know what an ellipse is? It's a kind of squash circle, fine. Newton kind of knew that, but he needed to know why that worked, and he got to why that worked, and that gave him gravity. And again, we now understand gravity, and it's now being reduced to a sort of trite formula that we teach to 14-year-olds, and you go, okay, well that wasn't very hard, was it? Why did it take Newton to come up with it? And the reason it took Newton to come up with it was because he didn't have the automation that we now have. He didn't have that mental automation. So automation is really, really important. But the other thing that this teaches us is that actually automation isn't enough. Automation is about mechanical processes, but actually automation is also about standardization. And that's the other thing that we need to do as we start to move into this world of how do I manage my virtual estate, which is continuing to grow at 10 or 15 or whatever percent a year. And that's really the trick that Facebook and Amazon and Google and Netflix have managed to do. What they managed to do is they managed to automate the heck out of everything, but they've also managed to standardize the heck out of everything. And when I ran those two big data centers for one of the large insurers in the UK, the largest insurer in the UK, you can work out who that was, the first thing we did was we automated things, but we standardized things. And that involved some fairly robust discussions between me in IT and them in the business, as I call them. And them in the business really liked the ability to customize things, really liked the ability to say, what I want this particular machine with this amount of memory and this amount of processor power and this amount of disk speed. And I said, great, you can have that, and here's the price for it. That's the price for this machine. But if you want one of the standard 10 or 12 machine configurations that we've defined, then here's the price for that. And they went, well, that's like a third of the price for my special customized machine over here. And I said, yeah, you can have either of them. Really, I don't mind. And so we introduced a mechanism of initially show back, just showing them what IT was costing them, and then eventually charge back, where I got my budget by charging those guys. It was internal transfer, it was all wooden dollars, but nonetheless, this was an effective way of forcing one of the other cornerstones that you need to think about as you think about automation. So automation is really important. Standardization is really, really important, because standardization stops you having that proliferation of letting 1,000 different virtual machine types bloom, and it allows you to get value out of automation. So as you think about management and as you think about automation, think about standardization first, because that's a real necessary step for it. And and as I say, it's sometimes a difficult discussion to have, because the developers, the software developers or the business want their own special tweaked version. That's fine, just show them the price of that at the same time as you show them the price of the standard alternative. Now, I say that like that's an easy thing to do. Of course, that requires you to actually work out what the price is. And that's based on all your different input costs. So that's quite a complicated thing to do, but there are mechanisms that can help you do that. So that's my message to you. Number one is as you start to think about automation and so on, think about standardization too. Two other quick points before I wrap up for this morning. The second is, this won't solve your problems. I worked with a big bank in the UK, and we did some great automation work with them. We did standardisation, and we did automation, and they did the whole bit, and they got their server build time, their virtual machine build time down from about 30 days down to about 15 minutes. It used to take them 30 days, lots of manual processes. We mapped out what all the processes were, we started to automate different chunks of them, and then we wired them all together, used some of our great tools, cloud system automation, operations orchestration. You know, these other tools are available, but these are the ones that HP has to offer. And they're great tools. They really can help you automate and manage those processes, and they did it really well. But when they got to the end of it, and they could bring up a virtual machine in 15 minutes, they said, do you know what, it still takes us 30 days to do it. Because of all the other things that get in the way. We need a manager to sign this off. We need to get approval to do this. We need to get all these other things standardised and automated as well. So that's the other message. The other message is when you standardise the IT processes and you think you solve the problem in IT, actually think about all the other stuff around it. And my final thought that I'll leave you with is when I talk to people about how to do this, and I talk to people about it, I say actually you need to think about where you're trying to get to. Right at the very beginning I said, is automation the answer? And that depends on the kind of question you're asking. Automation is the answer to producing IT more efficiently, that's to say, to standardising the things that we're doing. But the final question you need to think about, and I'll just leave you to think about this, is about effectiveness. Is IT doing the right things? And one way to think about that is to think about what a CIO is. The I in CIO usually stands for infrastructure, Chief Infrastructure Officer. They look after the infrastructure. And automation and standardisation and management technologies will for sure help you do your job if what you're doing is you're looking after the infrastructure. But we also talk now about the I standing for information, a Chief Information Officer. How can I get more value out of the data? If you're a utility company, how can I get more value out of the smart billing data that we get? If you're a tax office, how can I get more value out of the tax data that we have? If you're whatever it is, an engineering company, how can I get more value out of the data that we've got? So think about the information, because that starts to move from effectiveness to efficiency, from efficiency to effectiveness. Are you doing the right thing? And the final kind of thing that I might stand for is it might stand for innovation. Am I, as an IT professional, helping the business innovate? Am I, as a businessman, getting innovation, not just servers, out of my IT organisation? So that's what I'm going to say today. Yes, it's part of the answer. Yes, automation will help you. Yes, management will help you. And they are really important. Standardisation is a great step towards that. Eventually you will get to cloud if you keep following that path through. But also think about, am I doing the right thing for the business? Am I delivering that information value for the business? And am I delivering that innovation value for the business? Okay, I'll leave you with those thoughts. Thank you very much.
So how many people today have deployed private or hybrid cloud? Slightly more than I'd expected, but it's still a relatively small amount in comparison to the number of people in the room. So I suppose 6 or 7 years ago, I asked a similar question at an event in relation to server virtualization and received a similar sort of response from the room. So what I'm sort of suggesting is in 3 or 4 years' time, as Gartner and IDC have predicted that if we came back here, that we would see a much greater raise of hands within the room. We've seen significant interest in the private cloud type environments over the past number of months in particular. I believe we've got the only hybrid cloud executive demonstration suite in Dublin at the moment, and we've had a significant footfall of people coming in wanting to understand what it can do, how it can impact their environment. They want to run proof of concepts on it. And I suppose it's open to anybody in this room who'd like to come and see a little bit more about a private and hybrid cloud environment.
Somebody who has looked significantly into this is our user experience this morning, Barry Lowry, who is Director of IT Services and Strategy with the Northern Ireland Civil Service and the NCIS Head of ICT Profession. So what I'm going to do is get Barry up here now, and first of all to explain his title, and then to talk about his experiences and what's being done, because certain elements of what's being done in the North is being lauded by analysts and vendors alike as an example for what can be done, not only with the technology, but for the public sector everywhere. So, Barry, here, please.
Yes, my title is the Director of IS Shared Services and Strategy and Head of Profession, which is a bit of a mouthful. But what that really means is I'm responsible for 3 areas of work in the Northern Ireland Civil Service. The first is I run operational shared services for not only the 12 Northern Ireland departments, but also a number of other public sector agencies. The second is I'm the Chief Strategist for the Northern Ireland Civil Service, so I'm responsible for its IS strategy. And the third is that there are about 550 IT people work in the civil service, and I'm responsible for their development. So I carry the title of Head of Profession.
As I mentioned, that's quite a number of hats and responsibilities. But in terms of the shared services in particular, there's quite a range of organisations and bodies that you provide services to. So can you give us an idea of some of those?
Yep, it's probably worth giving a little bit of background to the journey. I was amused by Owen's slide earlier on, because in 1981 I was a fresh-faced young fella employed by the Department of Finance and Personnel to be a COBOL 2900 programmer working on mainframe computers. And in the 1990s, Northern Ireland government sold off its mainframe computers because the future was all about distributed computing. And this worked with the idea of next step agencies and pushing power and responsibility out the agencies. I'm sure anybody from public sector remembers this story. And in 2004, I was asked to develop a shared service model for the NICS, simply because we couldn't afford the amount of distributed computing that we had, the number of technologies we had, the fact that those technologies wouldn't talk to each other, and so on. So between 2007 and 2009, we built the Shared Service Centre, and we had all 12 departments on the Shared Service Centre. And then we started to say, well, there's an opportunity here to actually bring the benefits that we're achieving out the wider public sector. So we started talking to public sector organisations. We started talking to them about the benefits and savings that we could bring to them. And we now have over 40 that use the service, which is probably the biggest compliment, because one of the key aspects of shared services is for the core departments that use it, it has to be mandatory, because it costs the same amount of money to build it, whether 6 agencies use it or 12. So therefore 12 have to use it to get the economies of scale. Well, one of the reasons why shared services is important as part of this journey is it gives you, first of all, economies of scale, and it gives you standardisation. So once you bring together 12 agencies, 12 departments, all of a sudden you can invest not just in the technology that will bring the ultimate benefits, but also in the processes to underpin that technology. So for example, where my organisation, IT Assist, is built entirely on IDLE. IDLE is a very expensive process management tool to implement in an organisation. But if it's a big organisation in scale, it's relatively inexpensive. So we became very much a standard infrastructure, server farms, lots of storage in a data centre, and so on. So as far as our journey was, shared services give us scale and standardisation. We then started looking at virtualisation, which started to give us savings, but also started to give us a vision of how we could further reduce the cost of the infrastructure. And then obviously we started to think, well, private cloud is the way to give us automation and orchestration as well, which is important. But automation is a real way to savings and also reduce risk, because you're taking the human out of the equation. So therefore, you're not burning money, and you're making sure the same process runs the same way every time.
Well, that kind of it leads on to the next question, really, in terms of in providing those services and bringing all of that together. Are you seeing changes in demand from the customers you're working with now to do more?
Yes, and to do more 24/7 as well. I guess, you know, if you actually follow a journey through from the IT, from the perspective of an IT manager, when we started doing this distributed model of IT in the civil service, I ended up in the Department of Agriculture, and I was a systems analyst. And I'm sure many people in the room can empathise with this story, but you were given a budget to put in a project, and you either developed the system in-house or you bought a package, but you never handed back what was left of your budget. So you bought the biggest server you possibly could because you wanted this application to run like, you know, flying machine. And so when IT Assist was set up, there were 1,500 servers around the NICS. Now, just by rationalisation, virtualisation, we got them down to 700. But obviously, even 700 servers burns a lot of electricity and takes a lot of space. So one of the things we were particularly interested in was the development in the hardware. We realised we had enough scale to really start to look at the likes of blade servers and so on. So that was the first thing of interest to us. The second thing of interest to us was we were aware that many of the big players, as Owen said earlier, were looking at OpenStack, and we're starting to offer OpenStack. So when you're in an environment where you're saying, what do we do next? You want to increase your scale, but you also want to reduce your cost. So we were beginning to look at some of the products that we were spending money on, paying heavy licensing fees, and saying, can we actually adopt OpenStack? And then the third thing was, and it goes back to what I was saying about, you know, servers, you start to rationalise and virtualise, and you're making better use of your tin. But what you can't do is manage peaks and troughs in the old traditional model. So what we really wanted to do was, for example, our rating system. In Northern Ireland, the rates bills go out in first week in April. So the compute power is required in March, April, and May. So of course they're traditionally buying compute to deal with that peak, which means 9 months of the year, they're probably using 50, 60% of that compute power. What private cloud gives us is the ability to take that compute power away and use it somewhere else. Now, we have a range of diverse users. So some of the departments have their own IT teams. So if you take the Department of Agriculture, it effectively runs on two critical systems. There's a single farm payment system, which pays grants to farmers. There's the animal public health information system. There's time, which obviously is used to underpin the sale and birth and registration of animals. There's times of the year when they need to burst up compute, and they actually have architects in their team that know exactly when that is. So what we're going to give them the facility is they can actually literally go on the terminal themselves, burst up the computer power, use it, and without actually an intervention from the shared services organisation. And the billing and so on is all automated and all take care of itself. So in many respects, you've all these diverse organisations, but when you start looking at the infrastructure, they all want the same thing. They all want simplicity, they all want agility, they all want reduced cost, and they all want power. And that's a common denominator, and that's what we've now got up in Northern Ireland, and we're consolidating.
Well, just taking a slight step back, though, when you, as you said, when you started down this shared services route and you got to a point of being able to deliver, and then seeing possibilities for development and being able to do more, as you looked out at the technologies and the services that were available, what was your impression of the market? Was there a large amount of choice, or were you directed down a few specific routes immediately?
Without naming them, there's probably 3 or 4 no-brainer suppliers in the market. But we were particularly interested in other angles as well. You know, we were looking for an organisation that understood Northern Ireland. We were looking at an organisation that believed in what we were doing, and if you want to use the term, put some skin into the game. And so we were particularly taken, if we talk specifically about Hewlett Packard here, we were particularly taken about their technology. We were particularly taken with their commitment to OpenStack, and I think Owen referred to them as leaders in that earlier on. But we were also particularly taken with the fact that we had worked with them before, and they understood exactly what we were trying to do. And we felt that they locally could provide a shared vision with us. Because we're in the bigger game now, we're trying to reduce the cost of wider public sector services in Northern Ireland to free up money to literally put more nurses, more firemen and so on at the front end of the service. So they understood that as well. And already we're seeing signs that their technologists and our technologists together in a room are developing some fantastic ideas, and we'll see them start to be implemented, the first ones by the tail end of this year, and then in future years moving on from there.
So despite the fact that you found a technology partner who, as you said, not only understood the environment, but understood you as an organization and what you were trying to do, and yet the technologies that are being provided don't really have the spectre of vendor lock-in in the same way that used to be a fear in the past. That when dealing with cloud technologies and virtualization and then move to cloud technologies, the top 2 or 3 fears were often security, control, and vendor lock-in. Whereas that now, with the advent of OpenStack and standardization, seems to be less and less of a concern. Is that
it's
a concern for you?
As an objective statement, that's true. But the reality is, I employ an IT assist. I employ 300 people. About 275 of them are technologists. And you almost get this desired lock-in because people will get very precious about certain products and certain technologies. And I think one of the speakers mentioned that earlier on. And one of the challenges for Hewlett-Packard, and Dermot and I were talking about this the way down, was them convincing our guys that they had a vision that was attractive to our guys, because our guys were very precious about some of the technologies that they'd used and had great success with. And we're actually seeing a lot of traction there. So you will get, even though we're in an open environment, you will get people who get very intensely loyal to certain products and certain licensed products and so on. And a challenge is to create a culture where you're very open-minded about change and being agile. So it's one thing having the capacity to be agile, but it's another one to have the determination that you're actually going to do that. And I think we're moving into that environment. In IT Assist, we're seeing the first heavy use of open source software for things like monitoring systems and so on.
That's a key point, and something that Clive touched on as well, is the fact that even sometimes when you have successfully implemented the technology, bringing the people and the processes along to take full advantage of it can often be as much of a task, if not greater. So what was your experience in terms of, as you said, you said there was a certain preciousness among certain people there, and we all have the experience of when you hit upon something that just works, you're loath to give it up under any circumstances. So how did you bring the people along in terms of your own efforts and invest them in what you were doing?
The people stream was one of the critical parts of how we created shared services in Northern Ireland. I had a belief, and at one point I really did feel like John the Baptist shouting alone in the wilderness, that having an internal capacity was critical to us shaping our future, because we needed to be agile and we needed to evolve. And the one thing about the traditional turnkey 10-year system, you agree a point here and you say we can freeze that for 10 years. So actually there's no evolution in there. And over in London they're beginning to realise that with some of their big systems, that they actually lock themselves into not just one provider, but one paradigm, if you like, for 10 years or whatever length the contract was. So I believed that for us to have the necessary agility and ability to evolve, we need to have a strong internal capability. So then it was, how do you develop a value proposition for those staff? And as we started to populate the shared service centre with staff who were transferred from the departments, I would go out and see them, and I would always say to them, first thing is, being a jack of all trades isn't really fulfilling for you, because you don't ever get to master any one particular thing. So what we're going to do is free you up to work in your career of choice. So if you like dealing with people, that's where you'll work. If you like all the infrastructure, whether it's network, whether it's server storage, whether it's data center, we will let you work in your area of choice. But we'll also continuously develop you, and we'll credit you to be the best in your field. So if you're working with Cisco in the comms, we will get you Cisco engineering accreditation and so on. So these guys very much started to see there was a personal journey of improvement for them at the same time as an organizational journey of improvement. But what we also did was give them delegated authority. But it was delegated authority within boundaries because, you know, occupational psychology will tell you people will respond very positively to trust and delegation. So that was a key underlying value of the organisation. But that had to be for if you like, an altruistic purpose. We were going to continue to improve the service to the customer. We were going to continue to drive down the costs. So we started to get this rolling ball, to mix my metaphors, of people who were committed to this idea of a constantly evolving, agile organisation. And that really has helped us break down some of the traditional barriers that you would have to change. And I guess the best proof of that, because we were always very keen, it's okay for me to sit in front of an audience and say, we've a much more motivated workforce, but how do you know that? So one of the things that we decided to do to measure that was, we've entered the Sunday Times Top 100 Best Companies to Work For. First 2 years, every 2 years we do this. First 2 years we got one to watch. In other words, that's a very impressive high scoring organisation. This January we actually made the Top 100 Sunday Times. I think we're the first ever UK government department to do that. And that makes people sit up and take notice, not just actually people within the organisation, but senior stakeholders and politicians as well. So I was dragged along to a board of a public sector organisation recently, and one of the questions that I was asked was, well, we can see you're doing a good job, but how do we have the comfort that you're actually as good as some of the private sector people we would have used recently? And I said to them, well, what are you measuring on? People, processes? Well, ask them, have they been in the Sunday Times Top 100 list? Ask them, are they one of the Ireland's 4 organisations this year to get a 5-star quality award in terms of their processes? And that's where you get to when you have people who are committed to an organisational goal, and that's the strong position that we're in. And thankfully, where we've worked with new customers, the positive customer response, not just at user level, but stakeholder level, has continued that pattern of success. So, for example, there was a conference of further education colleges, and it was actually Belfast Metropolitan College stood up their chief operating officer and told the story of how they moved IT Assist and the benefits they've got out of it. I didn't say anything, I was just sat there answering questions afterwards. So that's a nice position to be in.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, you've described how you've been able to gain control internally and automate your processes in terms of controlling your infrastructure and the as you said, demand and being able to move resources around, but also extending that to some of your customers who have their own IT people to be able to manage and control and flex themselves. So to many people sitting here, that might sound like the Holy Grail in itself. So what are you looking at now? As you said, you in your developmental stages, you saw the next steps in terms of what you could do. Where are you looking now in terms of what you can do next?
In terms of in Northern Ireland, anyone who follows politics will know we're experiencing now what you guys down south experienced probably 2-3 years ago. So it's a very difficult time. So how can IT Assist help the executive in a very difficult time? Well, it's really not that different to what some of the private sector companies had during the dip in the 90s and the noughties. First of all, you've got to look at your operational costs, and you've got to say, are there areas where we can reduce? So I talked earlier about automation. I talked earlier about OpenStack and looking at replacing some of our licensed products. So that's the first area that we're looking at. The second area is, can we actually help the overall Northern Ireland block of money by reducing costs in the public sector? And we absolutely know that we can. So about 3 months ago, I was contacted by the CTO of one of the new super councils, and she asked, would we mind doing a shadow onboarding with them to get costs to inform their business case. And it was just going to be an option in their business case before they did something else. And we said, yes, we'll do that. We would always do that. So we went through that process, and she came back and she said, we actually want to take the service. And she has shared with us the savings that they're going to have over the other models that they looked at. So that's real savings to the ratepayer, or money that can be invested in stopping a leisure centre closing or whatever. So that's an important thing. But the third thing, and this is my holy grail at the moment, we're still trying to battle to convince the business that they need to seriously use technology to change how they work. So for all our efforts, I would say 90% of the civil service is very much a traditional civil service organisation. And by that I mean people come in between 8 and 9 in the morning, they go to the desk they've had for the last X years, they switch on and they work until 5, 6 and they come home again. But what we are doing at the minute is we're doing proof of concept around agile devices and Wi-Fi in a building. And what that shows is anybody can go into that city centre location. If they're at a meeting or they're just in town at another meeting, go into the canteen, open their laptop, pick up the Wi-Fi, log on and work quite happily. So what we're demonstrating to them is you do not need a desk for every single worker that you have. You can go through an assessment. You can see which are your knowledge workers that can be totally mobile and which are those people who work in the more operational areas where they need to be by a phone and a device all the time. And you start to say, can we reduce the state by thinking more agile, in a more agile way about the mobile workers? And the answer to that is that we can. So even by just buying more modern furniture and compacting the staff and getting out of a couple of expensive leases in the last year, the civil service saved £1.6 million a year. Well, what would happen if we reduced our overall estate by a third? You know, we've over 300 buildings. What would happen if we just wrote off 100 buildings? We could basically cover our deficit in one go. And it's about trying to get people to think like that. One of the things that exercises our executive is, and in many ways we're absolutely no different to down south, you know, people have to travel to Belfast to work, by and large, as they do to Dublin. And, you know, I've experienced the traffic jams and so on this morning. But that need not be the case. We have a system where anybody who has broadband at home can go securely through and work at their broadband speeds. So they can work quite happily from home. And what's happening in my organisation is we let people do that. And so people, the travel's reduced, the work-life balance improves, and they're actually capable of giving more. And we don't need so much estate. We're an exemplar in terms of how we've used physical space cheaply to run as an organisation. There's absolutely no reason why that model can't be burst out, if you like, to the entire Northern Ireland civil service. So that's the message that we've started to give to the permanent secretaries, and it's starting to get a bit of traction. We've got a presentation to do towards the end of this year where we're going to show them what's happened in this building, the proof of concept building, and it's a better service for customers because one of the things in the Wi-Fi is a guest service. So if somebody's sitting in the foyer waiting to meet the minister or the permanent secretary, they can work quite happily in the foyer. They can go to the canteen and work quite happily in the canteen using the guest service. So that's the way public sector, not just civil service, public sector has to modernise itself to be less of a burden to the taxpayer. And that's the holy grail as far as I'm concerned.
Into a paradigm where you're saying this is the only way we can do it, and no, we can't do anything different and anything new because our processes only allow us to do this. And the solution to that is to think about automation in the same way as Toyota think about automation in a factory. They think about automation in terms of flexible automation. They say, yes, we automate all these things, but actually we need the flexibility to change the manufacturing line. So in half a day we can change from making cars to making washing machines or whatever it happens to be. So they do automation, but they have flexible automation. So there are some dangers. If you allow automation to lock you into a set of processes that you can never break out of, then that might improve efficiency, but it reduces effectiveness, I guess is what I'm saying. And it reduces the ability for the organisation to innovate. So you shouldn't get locked into that.
Okay. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I suppose I would see, I agree with exactly what Clive has said, but I suppose I see automation at a more granular level and as the ability to be able to automate repeatable tasks that have already been have followed stringent process and control, change control process and so forth. So they've already been signed off and locked down. So once that's done, the tasks can be bundled together and orchestrated, if you like. But I suppose where I come from is it's really, I suppose, it's not taking away from the ability to make decision and change. We're just making life a little bit simpler and trying to save time and reduce efficiencies and save costs as such.
Okay.
The vertical, the seniority in those roles. So if you try and map tasks to those, things like patch management and creating servers and so on, that would be very much towards the bottom anyway. You know, in an old model, that would have been one of the things the new recruits would have been taught to do first. So in many respects, what you really want to do is maximise your human resource, because that motivates them and it gets more for you as an organisation. So I agree with Owen. What you really want to do with automation is look at the easy wins first. But one of the things that humans are very, very good at is understanding that the world isn't consistent and that things happen or customers do things in a certain way, and that need not initially lend itself particularly well to doing things the way that you've always done them. And humans can understand that and then work how to evolve that into the more traditional model that benefits from some of the things that other customers are using. And that's where they can really add value. So getting our guys, for example, in servers and storage, to go to a position where they can go to somebody's site, see what they're using at the minute, have used something similar there themselves, talk them through the journey that they went through in central government and how they can take that customer through a similar journey, that they can benefit from the scale and so on that we offer, the compute power available. That's a real skill in itself. Now that requires them to think differently. It requires them to develop their soft skills. It requires them to develop business skills. They need to understand concepts of business cases, benefits realisation, return on investment, and all those things that technologists never really felt needed to bottle them in the past. And so we've developed a stream of development. We call it Step It Up, Step IT Up. And that's very much about taking our junior managers or middle managers and getting them really confident in things like communication skills, team building skills, but obviously organising, understanding things like benefits realisation, business case development, project management and so on. And they're much more confident to go out with customers and really work in an architect role, whereas before they'd be very much in there as the engineer actually building the stuff.
Okay. All right, well, so one more question from Clark.
Okay. I was just wondering, in terms of having people out of the main office and managing them remotely, do you find that you're actually documenting things more as a result because of instant messaging, because of, say, handing over tasks rather than doing things informally?
One of the things that we did from day one was we built the organisation in idle. Because if you've got 275 people, you need some form of change management. Change management is absolutely critical. And so we started to develop ITIL, the whole idea of configuration management, change management. We have a change advisory board, all of those sorts of things that ITIL brings. And then the whole concept of incident management and understanding what caused the incident and was it a problem and does that problem need a plan to fix it or a service improvement strategy and all of those sorts of things. So we became a very process-oriented organisation anyway. So in many respects, if staff follow the processes, it doesn't really matter where they are when they're working on it. So one of the things we introduced for our staff early on was the concept of satellite offices, because we had staff working who lived all around the country. So it was, how can we come up with a value proposition for them and actually turn it into a marketing opportunity? So what we would do would be, if you take, Derry, which is 70 odd miles away from Belfast, we actually created a satellite space in Derry. We had a couple of people who were Derry residents and stayed there most of the time, and other people who worked there a couple of days a week. But how we sold that to the organisation was, we said, not every problem you have can be fixed remotely. So we want to put a team in that they can look after the geographic area and improve our response time. They thought this was fantastic. So they were happy to give us a small office with 5 or 6 spaces. So all of a sudden the staff were happy, the organisations were happy, and we have a marketing opportunity because it's all about the flexibility of the organisation. So once we did that, we started to talk to organisations down in Europe. We created space in Europe, and then the guys who lived around there, they started to use the satellite offices, and it means we're a very agile organisation.
Thank you very much for your attention and your questions and comments this morning. Thank you, of course, to our sponsors, PFH and HB, without whom we couldn't do this. And thank you specifically to our speakers, to Barry, to Clive, and particularly to Owen, who had to stand in at short notice. So we've heard an incredible amount of information this morning, which I'm sure will take you a while to assimilate. So hopefully it will help you in your decision in this area.